Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, you have such a beautiful smile. See what happens when you subscribe. You get a bonus greeting on every episode. On this episode, we talk to the one and only Jason Lesandrini. He is a organizational ethicist and a clinical ethicist. And this conversation is, buckle up for this one. It's a really phenomenal conversation. He's brilliant. And I think his frameworks and how he thinks about the role of ethics in an organization, regardless of your industry, I think is really enlightening and illuminating. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Jason, hey, man.
Hey, how are you, Nick?
Good. What's happening?
Not too much. It's a calm day on Friday.
Nice. That sounds like a really fun Friday.
Yeah.
I'm having a Monday today, so imagine that.
I understand. I've had many a Fridays be Mondays, but today is relatively calm. So,
well, welcome to the Ethics Experts, man. I've been excited to get you on.
Thank you.
Really excited to kind of dive in.
Yeah.
So you spent a lot of your career focused on, clinical ethics and how, and now organizational ethics. What kind of got you into this kind of corner of the world,
Yeah, the true story is chance and luck. That's actually what it was. So I had actually dropped out of college, of all things. I was at college. I dropped out and decided I didn't know what I was going to do. Probably worked in Michigan. I was, thinking about maybe go to work for General Motors. And of all things, I hung out with some friends and we went out for breakfast one morning and the line was really long at the breakfast shop. And I walked into this used bookstore next door and I kicked this book called Mortal Choices by a woman named Ruth McCacklin, Dr. McCacklin. And she was in Columbia at the time, Chicago. And it talked about doing ethics in hospitals and talked about this thing called a beeper ethicist. And I turned to my friends and I said, I'm going to do this. And they're like, that is that is the dumbest thing. No way, not going to happen. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. This is what I'm going to do. And lo and behold, magic presto, I bought the book, went home, I read it in a week and was convinced that was it. And so I set on a path to do it.
So what was it? I mean, how freaking random is that? I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah, it was nuts.
What was it about the book that even made you pick it up? And then was it the cover? And then what was it in the first couple of sentences that you were reading? Or was it a divine thing, like a light from heaven kind of shone?
It's sort of, Nick, I'll have to be honest with you. I feel like it. Yeah, it was kind of the latter. The cover, I'm looking for the book. I think I have it at home now, but the cover isn't really that interesting. No disrespect to the publisher. It's just not really that interesting. I just read it and said, holy cow, there are people who are facing these really tough choices in healthcare, right? With patients, amongst clinicians. And then there's this group of people that end up helping them do it, helping them navigate the values tensions that they experience on a daily basis. And so and then the book goes on and talks about a whole lot of different cases. And I got really enthralled with it and figured, man, I'm going to do it. And then it just ended up happening. I lived in East Lansing, Michigan at the time. And Michigan State, where I did my undergrad, was one of the best places in the country to do it. Yeah. It is all these fortuitous events.
What do you think it was, though, in you, in your background or growing up or something where that resonated with you? You know what I'm saying? There must have been, I mean, maybe you were just imbued with, this this tuning fork or something, but do you feel like in reflecting back, were there any things that, you can kind of point to in terms of the way you grew up or in terms of the values that were kind of embedded in you at a young age that this field kind of resonated with you as you're just freaking flipping through this book before you ordered your hash browns?
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, the short answer is I'm not sure exactly. I don't understand. I think the long-wind answer is, I was raised by a caring and kind family. It was a bigger family with my grandparents, my parents, and they integrated a lot with healthcare. My grandparents were sick. My mom had been sick sometime. My dad had also been sick, and so maybe I just had exposure to healthcare, and that was just sort of a natural place for me to plug in. I think the other thing is if you ask people when I was younger, I don't think they would say like I was an inquisitive person. I don't think I was. I was a, your standard kid. Didn't really ask a whole lot of questions. I think once I left sort of high school in a way, I was searching for something. So I
Yeah.
remember going to the local community college and I took the ASVAB. I don't know if you know what the ASVAB
Hmm.
is, the military test to tell you what you should be.
Right.
And it, the top five were counselor, pool cleaner, priest, um, motivational speaker, and I'm blanking on the fifth one. I think I still have the results somewhere at home. And so I started looking at those careers. I remember doing that and looking into those careers. Um, but there wasn't sort of this light until I
Yeah.
honestly until that book. I just was like, holy cow, this is amazing that people can do this and get to sit in this space. I mean, that's my reflection. 40 years later, in essence, 35 years later, that uh, there are lots of interesting challenges that happen in healthcare, as in every industry, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not unique just to healthcare. And there are people who are at the ready to help figure that out. And then it was about a path, like, so what's the path to get there? And I chose philosophy. That's ultimately what I did. And so did my undergrad in philosophy. And then it did. I got the bug. I got bit by that philosophy bug, and I just was all in. Loved it. Loved all my ethics courses, that I did. I ended up studying abroad in the UK. I loved that. I got to see how the UK health experience was and the different kinds of ethics issues they see there, and it just sort of took off from there.
This might be a stupid question, but do you feel like you were more interested in philosophy because in some way it was like a lily pad to this other thing that you were interested in? Or do you feel like if you had just sort of wandered into a philosophy class, you may have sort of found yourself on this path
Hmm.
as well? You know what I'm kind of asking?
Yeah, yeah. So the philosopher in me says we can't prove that counterfactual. So I don't know, but what I will say is, um, I don't know if I would have ended up in the exact same spot as I am now,
Yeah.
but I think I probably would have been in that kind of space, the sort of thinking space, the sort of um, questioning, why do we do it? Why do things happen the way they do? I could probably just as equally envision myself going into like psychology or, these days think a lot about organizational behavior, those kinds of things. So it's a
Hmm.
natural, I think, synergy, and I probably would have ended up close or in some proximity to the place I am now. I think my undergrad in philosophy just sort of nurtured uh, maybe something intuitive in me or a characteristic I potentially had, and I just I mean, it's like I got bit. I mean, and I was infected with it.
What you can always talk, or I can always kind of tell when somebody got bit. Like
Yeah.
in my undergrad, there's a lot of things I'm interested in, but I feel like the path I took, like that was definitely the path that I was supposed to be on. And I
Hmm.
had all these sort of like confirmations along the way.
Hmm.
And I think those confirmations ended up, creating, I don't know, at some level, like some momentum to like keep rolling forward. What were the things in philosophy where you were like, okay, I really like feel at home here? Like, what did you
Yeah.
love so much about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had a number of professors who were really, really, I mean, to be honest, kind and caring. I mean, I know that's kind of, but they were really interested in making me better. And making me a better thinker, and that mattered to me. I had some practical experiences too. So I remember, being in philosophy, I was, taking my philosophy classes, and I wanted to make sure I stayed connected to healthcare. And I volunteered at a hospice when I was in an undergrad. It was my
Wow.
sophomore year, and I, in essence, I sat with people who didn't have family. That's ultimately what I did, and I would just be there. It was an inpatient hospice. I remember exactly where it was. There's a gentleman, I don't remember his name now. It's been a number of years, but I sat there while he passed away, and he talked to me, and we
Wow.
just talked about life. It wasn't, he wasn't reflecting back on all the things he did and didn't want to do. It was just like, oh, what are kids doing these days? What's in the news? It was sort of like a normal conversation that you and I would have on any, random day at a restaurant. And I just remember that first sort of experience being with him, and what it was like to be with another person when they passed, right? That
Yeah.
sort of moved me. And then guess tied it back into the work I was doing in the classroom about like, wow, there are these really interesting challenges that come up about ethics in healthcare at the end of life, or it wasn't even that, it was just all of it. And then, so more directly to your question, um, I had a couple professors in ethics who just really sort of pushed me. I think that was part of it, and then allowed me to sort of just explore whatever I wanted to explore. And it worked out clearly. I mean, look where where I am
Yeah.
now. I think in my life, it worked out for the better. I think ultimately philosophy enabled me to sort of keep asking questions. That's why I liked it so much. And I keep doing that today. Like, well, why do we do that? And then the other piece that came up in philosophy was about argumentation. And so, I think reasoning wins the day, more often than not. And that's what we should be thinking about. And so, what's the strongest reason we have for doing X? What's the strongest reason we have for doing Y? Which one wins? Which argument wins out in the end? And that's sort of what I like to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's sort of some what's the word? There's like an anchor point there,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of freedom in that, right? Like you can
Hmm.
attack kind of any problem with
Hmm.
that framework.
Hmm.
And I love philosophy folks because they seem to be able to like think in straight lines, and
Hmm.
I'm like I'll argue anything, you know what I mean? And so I love arguments as well. Um, and so I'm fascinated by it because that's like, maybe a different path that like I didn't take that I
Yeah.
may have loved, you know what I mean? Um, did you like how has your perspective evolved, at least like with respect to, clinical ethics, right? Like you had this experience at the hospice, you're kind of
Yeah.
starting to explore this thing, you freaking randomly, King Arthur randomly was born by the sword and the stone, you know what I mean? So like you were
Correct.
randomly born
Right.
by this college that had like this great sort of program that really was, a launching pad for you. And I'm sure over that time, also, I think philosophy folks. I don't know if it's appropriate to call anyone who studies philosophy as a philosopher. So, pardon
No,
pardon that,
so do I. Yeah.
but they also can like have sort of strong convictions, but they're also like it seems like they're open to something else. They're open to a different perspective. So I tend to see like a lot more sort of like I don't know, like evolution,
Yeah.
or like at least the possibility for like evolution of understanding around a topic or a position on a certain topic. Have you seen like an evolution over your time?
Yeah. 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 100%. I think so. I think about the evolution in two ways. So I think this is true, Nick. We're all ultra naive when we get into the world and
Right.
into, we leave college, we think a particular way. We're ultra naive. And I think I was naive at the time. I didn't understand how healthcare really worked. I mean, I thought it was like you go to the doctor and it's simple. It's not. Healthcare is,
Right.
you know, lots of intertwined entities,
With
trying to
competing
navigate a.
incentives.
With all different incentives and all different values and all different goals. And I think what I've done over my progression over the time is I've started to see that right, and that similar to recent thinking broadly about are we what shareholders do we are we just going to think about shareholders in business? Or are we going to think broader to the broader community?
Hmm.
I think that's true in my thinking as well, that you know patients are there. Yes, we prioritize patients. Clinicians are there, we prioritize. And there's all these other things that are going around that impact patients, that impact the clinicians, that
Totally.
impact healthcare systems, that impact organizations. Like it's too naive to think it's this organization, their values, it's not that way. It's always broader than that. So I think that's progressed. I think the other thing that's progressed with me is I was really fascinated in clinical ethics. I still have a strong interest in the ethics issues that occur in the daily practice of medicine, like that a strong affinity for it. But as I've started to see how healthcare is constructed, I start to think broader, but to this space of organizational ethics that we've been talking about like how is it that organizations make decisions and what is it that they do, but healthcare and non-healthcare alike, like what is the process in which they live out the values that they sort of espouse, or the
Yeah.
mission or
Right.
vision that they espouse. I think that's how my perspective is changed, that those things have lots of impact on the clinical side of things, or when you take it outside the healthcare setting, organizational decisions have so much impact on the way the people who work for the organization and the people who interact with that organization. And
Mhm.
that's sort of where I've evolved to and really have focused, the last 5 to 7 years of my work and life on is, how is it that organizations can do that stuff? How do you live up to your values? How do you be good leaders? How do you build ethical cultures? How do you build ethical leaders and that kind of stuff? I think that's the progression.
I would imagine that like coming out of healthcare, where at least at kind of an overarching level, there's a sort of purity of purpose, at least in theory,
100%.
around like patient care and like the main thing being the patient, like that stakeholder group. And then being able to see in practice, right? Like those are kind of the words on the paper. And then being able to see in practice that like, oh, wait, there's actually a bunch of these different sort of mini cultures or these mini sort of stakeholders with, like you said, these sort of competing incentives and this sort of complex like interaction that ends up ultimately influencing this sort of broad stated goal. Like the
Yeah.
clarity of that maybe dissonance on the healthcare side, it probably influenced a lot and allowed you to see a lot more sort of nuance that is probably, occurring on just like the regular organizational ethics side.
Yeah, 100%. That's spot on. You've nailed it. That's exactly right.
So what are some of the biggest differences you've seen? Or, I mean, maybe, maybe give us like, a quick,
Like
thumbnail
clinical issue. Yeah. Like
of
what's a
like
clinical?
what is clinical ethics
Yep.
and like what are
Yep.
some of those issues,
Yep.
and then like then we can talk about kind of the difference between sort of the clinical side at the bedside versus in an
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah. So I'll give you some standard stuff around clinical ethics that I think people face. So say you have a patient who can't speak for themselves, right?
Okay.
And doesn't have anybody to make decisions for them. How do we make decisions for that person? Like what
Okay.
do we do, right?
Right.
Or say they do have a decision maker and the decision maker, the clinician has made some recommendations about what clinical care is appropriate, and the decision maker is saying, I don't want that, I want something else, or I want you to continue, with aggressive interventions, and the clinical team doesn't believe that those are going to yield the outcome that the goal that you're hoping for, whatever it may be.
Right.
And so,
Just cover them in leeches. Yeah.
yeah, correct. And so there's all those challenges that happen in the daily practice. Do you tell the truth? What does the scope of the truth look like when you're trying to tell a diagnosis? How much information do you have to disclose to people? What does it mean to say someone has capacity?
Mhm.
There's lots of different things that happen on a daily basis where values tensions come up either amongst the clinical team, the family members, the patient, or others that are engaging in that daily practice. And then when you sort of shift up to organizational ethics, I think of it broader as it's like, how is that same sort of idea about how do we make decisions based on values at the organizational level? So if you think about, I mean, it doesn't even have to be in healthcare. It can be where do we decide to build something, right? So where do we build a clinic? Where do we build a hospital? Where do I build a bank? Where do I decide to invest? Those are all values laden decisions. They're all value laden
Totally.
decisions.
What I
And
mean, you're saying when you boil it down, what else could it be?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You're right. And so how do we do that? How is it
Yeah.
that we think about the things that we're going to prioritize in an organization based on our values? Because isn't that, Nick, what we're supposed to be doing as an organization? Say say I'm an organization and I believe in XYZ values. That's the thing that should be guiding me on all the decisions I make. If not, then what is the XYZ values but merely a PR tactic to get people to believe in the organization? So if we're
Right.
really going to live out the organization, it's about values. And so the leaders in the organization have to think about those values as they're making decisions. And so, the clinic one is one for an example, or building a facility is another one. The one I've heard from a number of my colleagues across the country is around staffing. This has become a more and more sensitive issue in healthcare, right? It's hard to staff. That we have enough nurses, but they're not coming back oftentimes to nursing, right? And so you may only have 10 nurses. So how do you staff those nurses on the unit? If you have 50 patients, do you do it equally? Do you do it based on acuity? And I think that is the case outside of healthcare too. Like if we don't have enough staff to run the plant the way we're going to do it, what are we going to prioritize? And why do we prioritize one thing over another? And if you ask Jason why we do it, we should do it because it's consistent with some of it's consistent with our values to the best of that it can, and that's why we choose the decision. So when I often interact with leaders, I use a philosophical tool, but it's called because, right? So why do we do something? We do it because, and what should follow after is the thing that's consistent with the mission, vision, and values of the organization. So,
Mm-hmm.
Nick, your organization, why do you decide to do X, Y, and Z? You do it because, and then you fill that blank in, right? And what I would love, and I don't live in a Pollyanna world, but I would like to, is for people to say, because here's why it's consistent with who we say we are as an organization.
So part of the challenge, I guess, so this is going to sound a little kind of meandering, so just kind of bear with me here,
Yeah,
but
of course.
in sort of like traditional ethics, and again, I'm not a philosophy guy, but there's like several different sort of like approaches to ethics, right? There's like utilitarianism or like deontology or like, I don't know, consequentialism or something, right? Like these are like well-stated sort of like constructs of like how to approach ethics in general.
Mm-hmm.
And those exist and those can be debated and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. When you step into an organization, there's some sort of implied framework that's not like articulated in actuality to the extent that something like utilitarianism is or like deontology is or something. And the decisions are not sort of consistently applied in the context of that framework because it's a business's culture is just like a bunch of individual decisions and a bunch of individual like values being expressed, and like those are changing all the time and so forth. So how do we like deal with that sort of ambiguity or amorphousness of a sort of a stated value position and like the fallout from it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, totally. Okay, so I'm going to go back to you're right. There are tons of different philosophical theories about what's the conception of the good, what does it mean to do right, those kinds of things. And they can be competing at times. Now, we don't have to go down a super complex philosophical rabbit hole about.
But we can. Just kidding.
Do they align on most issues? We could have those kinds of things. We could have that conversation. So what do we do about that in the context of a business, right? And so I think of a business in a way as a microcosm of values that there should be some overarching shared organizational value in which decisions are made. So yes, no, AT&T is not going to come out and say, you know what, we're going to be utilitarians. That's what we're doing as an organization. But what they can come out and do is give a structured framework for how they are going to make decisions, right? That you're exactly right, Nick, that it leads to a bunch of different people making a bunch of different decisions that oftentimes aren't inconsistent. And so I'll tell you in healthcare, so people who have done this really well are Catholic healthcare systems. They have this process called discernment, and it is a process that leaders are supposed to adhere to when they're making decisions. It's a framework in which to think about how you're going to make a decision that impacts the organization. I think that same stuff can be applied and trained to on any business side. So
I agree.
I'm picking at AT&T, pick anyone, right? It could be Verizon, it could be anybody, any organization across the country, that they can train leaders to a framework in which they make decisions. And that framework can be broad enough to encompass the values and to make sure that, it's sort of what's the background that's bringing us to the challenge? Who are the people that are impacted or affected by it? What values are they bringing to the table? What are the organizational values? How are we going to make this decision? What options are available to us? When we think about option A, what value does it promote versus option B? Right. What value does it promote?
Well, it's a prioritization.
It is 100%
discussion. Yeah,
it's 100%. And at the end of the day, all of it, Nick, is down to. And not to simplify it, it's about what's the strongest argument, right? Like which one has the most weight to it that we think moves us forward, right? It's sort of look at all of the options that we can choose. Which one has the strongest argument that's consistent with our organization, right? And our values, both stated and unstated, right?
Yeah.
I think being very clear about that, right? And then I think the last thing that we can train, organizations to is like, these things come up regularly. We can try and prevent them from being challenges for us, right? We can be active in prevention or putting systems into place. But I think the key is we need to teach organizations and the people who work for those organizations how to make decisions for that organization, right? And doing that in a way that's values-based, because that's ultimately, to your point, that's what all of these decisions are. They're ultimately all values-based decisions.
When my brother and I came into this company, we wanted to, we always believed that like culture was the only sustainable competitive advantage. And so we put a lot of work into, and this is not like we did it, we're perfect. Like I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying like we as leaders of the company, we had a high priority, or we prioritized sort of culture. Yep. And we struggled a little bit in like, how do we articulate this and how do we make it like actionable? Because it's easy to like just come up with 20 values and say, these are our values,
Yeah.
But to your point, there's myriad, situations where like there's competing things and like there's no clarity. And so Correct. What we came up with was like our priority, I think we called it like the priority algorithm. And we said like the first thing we want to do is like maximize the client experience. And then the second thing we want to do is maximize like the front end employee experience. And then, and then we had like 5 or 6 sort of things. And then, at the bottom was, me, so we wanted to put into that, like, not Nick, but like each one of us should be at the bottom of like that totem pole. And if we can have that kind of at least as a guide, it Correct. Should allow for something. It should allow for something like permanent to point back to argue why one decision is better than another. Right. Do you think that's smart? Just kidding. Do you think like the gap in like organizational culture is really like a clear articulation of that prioritization beyond just stating, the values on the wall? We had a webinar recently with Sharon Watkins, who's the woman who took down Enron. Mm-hmm. And she was talking about how, Enron won, culture of the year, and they were on freaking Forbes, and like, their values were like respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. And they had all these like dramatic, romantic, Martin Luther King Jr. quotes, the world, I don't know what the quote is. The world dies when we refuse to speak up, or, so those are stated. And then, and yet like, that's a cautionary tale of an organization whose like deed didn't follow its word. I don't really know what I'm saying. Like, would a prioritization that was actually adhered to help to have like prevented that from, falling apart? Do you think like, is it just a clarity of prioritization? And
no,
like,
I don't think it's all just a clarity of prioritization. So I'm going to go back to a couple things that you said before. So first, that values on the wall mean nothing unless there are behaviors behind those values that people are held accountable for. So you've started to do that, Nick. You said in your company, you said, these are the values that we have. And then what we do is we need to ascribe behaviors that we expect out of people for that value. So if the value you're talking about, so take Enron, is integrity, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And, I'm not inside of integrity. I wasn't in there in Enron. But oftentimes what we see across organizations, I think this is pretty well published, is we put values up on the wall, we have a mission that we put out there, and then that's just it. It's just left there to be, right?
Okay, done. Good.
Exactly.
Next. Yeah.
And the assumption is that the team members and leaders who work in that organization know what those things mean for the organization, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there was a paper that was published. This would have been a long time ago, 15 years ago. I think there was a paper that was published that looked at like what top values do the top 100 S&P companies have, and integrity is on every one of them, roughly. Yeah. Right. So 2 things I think to say about that. One is, okay, that's great. There's 3 things. That's great. 2, is that really what makes you unique? Is that you have integrity? If that's the case, the other 100 companies have that too. So you're not really that unique. And then 3, what does integrity mean for that organization? Like, what does it mean? And so, I've seen different examples of this. There was an example, I don't know if YKK was a zipper company. I think it was in Japan, but then they had the first plant here in Georgia. And they did a bunch of this stuff. They talked about their values and then what those behaviors were that tied into those values. And so that's, stuff I've done with groups is, Okay, fine. You can have those values. Those are great. If you want to have integrity and whatever, those are great. Now tell me what that actually means to the leadership team, and then how are you going to monitor that in the work and the behavior? And I think in Enron, don't know all the details.
Yeah.
That wasn't monitored, right? There wasn't, this is what it means, here's the behaviors, and then now we measure to it, right? Even if you had all that, Nick, I'm not sure you could still get rid of it because you still had humans working there, right?
Right.
And so you have all these opportunities for biases to kick in, right? Or for blind spots or pressures that come from internal and external or perverse incentives, as you've said, we've said before. And so there are lots of other things that need to be done, but I think that's sort of what starts the foundation. Then I think it's then exhibiting that behavior as leaders with all team members. My gut and sense is that a lot of team members come to work looking for someone to help fill in the moral framework at work, right?
Yeah.
So I think they may have their own moral framework at home, but when they come to work, right, Nick, when they come to work for you, they're going to look at you and see what you do. I was just talking about this with another group. So Nick, if you leave 20 minutes early every day for work, that sets a behavior, maybe not explicitly endorsed, about what it's okay to do with time, right? Nick, if you use the company copier and make 5,000 copies for your personal benefit, that sets a behavior, right? And so it's about the leaders sort of exuding the behaviors that you're looking for and letting other team members see that and pointing that work out, right? It's not just let it be tacitly seen like, hey, I mean, I wouldn't do it this way, but Nick, you could, is like, look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm a good person. Look what I'm doing. I'm living out the organizational values. I'm not copying on the machine. It's not that silly, but I think that's sort of the basic idea. Then I think, to your point about prioritization, is you can prioritize those values, right? You can say, like, if we're going to pick something that's top, it's this, right? And then not only do your internal stakeholders know that, but then your external stakeholders should know that this is how we operate as an organization. And I think we see this in companies. Yours is a perfect example. I think there are others. The one people often talk about is Patagonia. Patagonia is a perfect example of this.
Yeah. They
talk about what they live publicly, right? And you can see it when you purchase a Patagonia product, you go into a store, whatever it may be. That's sort of the values that they're living, and then they hold people accountable to when those behaviors are not being followed. It's not a single solution to basically prevent Enron. I don't know if we could have or not. We might have been able to lessen it with some of this stuff, but I think we have examples of companies who are doing some of that work that show maybe that's the path to not have these things happen.
It feels like, when you put two magnets, like, I'm not a magnet guy, but like,
Yeah.
If they're not different poles, they're like kind of repel.
Yeah.
It's like the culture is like really the pressure trying to close that gap between these sort of like these different, these sort of same poles, because like behaviors are changing all the time. The composition of the body is changing, right? Like your cells turn over every 7 years, supposedly. The composition of the company is changing all the time. There's people coming in with different baggage and different experiences and different moral frameworks or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like this like ongoing reaction, and perhaps it's really just like a forward pressure to just continually try to like, if
Correct.
it gets a little off track, you got to push it forward, because kind of to your point, like we all drive on streets that have speed limits up on them. That's the that's the value. That's the word on the wall, and no one drives the speed limit. Everyone drives a little bit over, and some people drive 7 miles over, and that's really the kind of safe zone. So that exists throughout every organization, and I remember coming into, new companies at different times and saying like, okay, yeah, I get the training, but like, what's the true, like, what are the real rules? And those are, to your point, these unstated rules, and like, which rules are fine to ignore. And the challenge in that is like totally happening in my own brain. Like nobody's saying that. I'm just like sort of perceiving that. And like, if there's 1,000 people in the company, there's 2,000 eyes, in 1,000 brains where that's happening as well. So it's just this kind of like moving thing at all times,
But I think the beautiful thing about it, Nick, too, that you said is the magnets it's a constant reiteration and movement. It's not one and done. It's not a CBL. It's a lived experience within the organization. And just like with any living organism, over time it does shift, right? We all are going to shift. I mean, your listeners probably don't. I had hair at one time, right? Like that is true. I did. I don't anymore, right? Because this organism has shifted as time has gone on and
Right.
things have happened to me. And so it's about a constant iteration and thinking about it, right? So ethical behavior, I don't think it is something. It's a one and done CBL, or it's even just a one training session. It's a constant iteration and witnessing the behavior that you're trying to get and making sure assessing on a regular basis. Are we living up to those organizational values? What does it mean to do that? And as we keep moving along, or do the values not fit us anymore? People change. That is the
Right.
way it works. Organizations change. And so there has to be honest reassessment of, are these really the values that we're living out? To your point, then there are all those informal systems, right, that happen underneath. I think Linda Trevino says, it's the myths and the stories and the legends, and I've done some of this too, and asked folks, tell me the story that goes around the organization, right? Like, when you came on board, what was the story there? There was this one employee who did X, Y, and Z, and that thing lives on in legacy, and it could be good or it could be bad, and that dictates how that subunit or the larger unit or the organization may operate. But we have to uncover that kind of stuff and either write it or promote it, right? So right size it and say, that's not something we do, or promote it. Yep. Hey, Nick did work for us before. You're right. He did do that really great thing where he saved that person from a burning building. Yep. That's in our DNA. We want that
That's
to happen.
who we are.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? This whole conversation is super interesting, but you see some organizations really kind of struggle with it. And then you see other organizations that seem to have like really gotten it. And I kind of always think about the Marines as like an organization that gets it and like self-selects in people that like, I'm not a Marine, but like a Marine's a Marine. And like if a Marine fought in Okinawa or another one fought in Afghanistan, there's like this bond between them, and they're both Marines and they're different than other people. And those people self-selected into that branch of the military because those values were, there's some attraction to that, right? Like there's some, which then implies that there's some sort of like clear, like multi-generational, some kind of clear articulation of these values that like spans time, and people that are not even a part of it are attracted to it. And they end up like living out that picture of what they think that is to be. A Marine is very different than, a sailor or something. Like they just are.
Well, they have a shared language too, right? Like if you think about what does another Marine say to another Marine, right? Like, Semper Fi, right? Woo-ha. Like there's this language that they share too. And it is not only a set of values, but it's also a lived experience with them too. And I'd like to conjecture, not in an ivory tower way. I think there are companies like that too, right? That live that kind of those values out and stand for something. The often cited example, Johnson and Johnson with the Tylenol situation. I know it's older, but there are others along the way, right? Where you see values lived out, right? And then when there are slippages, because there will be, that people are holding them to account. Either the board is holding to account, the CEO holds to account, or the community holds them to account, right? But I think you're right, that there can be values that live across an organization, and employees will select companies for that. There was a book, I was reading it the other day. It's called Good is the New Cool. I don't know if you've heard about this book, but I'm not far enough into it. But one of the pieces I was reading, it's like, people are looking for organizations to be good, right? Like they are. That's the sort of youth group coming up,
it's a currency now.
Yeah, and so that's exactly right. And so they'll look for it, right, when they're coming into an organization, and they want. I don't think they need to share all the organizational values, because I don't think you'll actually ever have enough employees to work in your organization that they share all of your values. But it's sort of like with everything. We have to there's things we can tolerate, there are things that we can't tolerate, right? And so we have to get close alignment amongst team members, right? I don't share all the values that you do, Nick. It doesn't mean we couldn't have a great relationship and friendship over time, right? But
Right.
it's okay to have differences, right? And sometimes those differences bring us together closer when we recognize that they are. The same thing can be true with team members and their employer, right? That it's okay to not have exact synergy on who you are and who the organization is. I think it probably makes the organization stronger. But what I can say is that people are looking for you to stand for something and looking for you to say what your values are and ask it. I will tell you in my current role, people ask me what's the culture like in the organization? And this is the other thing I've been getting a lot of. What's the culture like on your team?
Yeah.
And what's funny to me is I often say, listen, you shouldn't believe anything I say.
That's what I say.
Yeah. Of course, I'm going to tell you it's positive, right? Like, what am I going to tell you? Well, it's actually really bad. I'm a toxic leader. No, nobody's going to say that stuff. It's a lived experience. You need to hear from people who are on the team and
100%.
hear multiple voices from it. And that's, that's what we do when we bring people onto our team. We make sure they're interviewing with tons of people on our team so that they can hear what the culture is like in the department and broader into the organization. But I think people are ultimately, this is just around, like, that's what I think people are looking for is a set of values that they can live with in a job and feel connected back to something meaningful.
That's probably really the question. I mean, every interview I do, like for like a new hire or something, everybody seems to ask that question. And that's kind of my response. I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's first of all, coming from my perspective. Second of all, like there's
Right.
a little bit of a moral hazard here in me telling you that it's great when it's probably not going to be anywhere close to,
Yeah.
like this sort of rosy picture that I'm painting. And I can kind of share what my vision is for it, but like
That's
you have
right.
to get kind of confirmation from people who are living in it to see how close it is to that. You know what I mean?
Correct.
I mean,
Yep.
it's almost like asking like, oh, what's the weather like by you? And it's like, I don't know. It's freaking rain some days. Some days it's freaking really hot. Other days
Yeah.
there's frost on the grass. Like
Right.
I don't know. It's changing all the time,
Correct. Yeah, I don't correct folks who interview, but one of the reasons maybe is to say, on average, what is it like to be there? Or tell
Yeah.
me the best day and why it was the best day. Like
That's a better question.
when you
Yeah.
lived out, and tell me the worst one. Like what was it about that day that
That at least
didn't
gives you
live
the
up?
sort of standard
Yeah.
deviation or something.
Yeah, that's
of
exactly right.
the
That's exactly
experience,
right. Yeah. Yeah. So when I talk about to your point, Nick, what are we trying to build here? What's the culture we're building in the organization? What's the culture we're building on our unique team? And then it's your job when you get to those next interviews, should you make it, to ask, tell me, he told me it was like that. I need to hear, is that true?
Or like, where is it not like that or something?
Yeah, when does it not live out? Like, give me an instance when it doesn't live out. And I think the other thing, Nick, you have to share with your team is you have to say, it's okay for you to say that stuff.
100%.
Yeah, like
I mean,
want
the
you
worst
to
thing
tell
you can
them.
do is like, I think, I don't know. I just, it's hard to describe somebody who's been like on land, a land lover, let's call them. It's hard to like describe what seasickness feels like. You know what I'm saying? And like every ship has a different, it's moving depending on the storm it's in and the size of the ship and all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of times we as organizations want to say like, no, there's smooth sailing, man. It's like, you're not going to feel any. I've been on a cruise ship, which are freaking floating cities. And like, you can feel that thing rocking, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, if you're in that same spot in a schooner or something, it's gonna be rocking a lot more. And so I think, people are excited when they're coming into a new job. They want the values to your point of, good is the new cool. They want those values to be true. And there's always some like reckoning, like once you're past that, like that honeymoon period and people start to feel like perhaps, oh, this is just like every other company, or I thought it was going to be this and then it's that. And that's really like an expectations mismatch, which ends up, it's all circular, I guess, which ends up kind of, that missed expectation can leave like a sour taste in people's mouth that leads to like lower engagement. Like somebody 9 years into a job is rarely as like engaged and like bright eye and bushy tail as they are in the first couple of weeks of that job, right? When everything's new and shiny and, everything is possible. Why do you think, so I'm pivoting a little bit here, but like, I don't know, we were talking about myths, we were talking about stories, we were talking about shared language and the ability of an organization like the Marines to like maintain a culture that is pretty consistent. It seems like, at least in like if you read history, So why don't organizations take advantage of the human things, the storytelling, the myths, the songs, whatever, that can be really kind of like sinew to kind of bind the body together, to the extent, like in a corporate setting, to the extent that like they can. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just feels like such a massively missed opportunity for organizations, not just for the sake of like values, like, yeah, value, good's the new cool, fine. But like in my experience, it leads to like better businesses. It leads to better, fine. Let's put it in dollars and cents terms. It leads to faster growth. It leads to more profitability. That's rooted, I think, in like authentic employee engagement, because they're like
Correct.
animated and they're like pushing the freaking ball down the field in like a more consistent way. But it's like they put the values on the wall and that's it. Or they, you know what I'm saying? Like it ends up just being
so I
like
think
fake,
here's what I would say. There's probably lots of reasons for this, but one that comes to mind, I think, is about people in the ethics space have not been good about selling ROI. Right?
Yes, 100%.
They just have not been, right? Most of, and we can talk about the distinction between ethics and compliance, but even just in the ethics space broadly, we're not good about selling what the ROI is. One, because we didn't even know how to conceptualize it, right? Like, what is it that we're going to tie it to, right? Oh, engagement. Okay, yeah. Now we're going to try that. And so then we measure, ethical culture or ethical leadership or ethics behaviors, and then we tie it to engagement, and we find exactly what you're saying. Like, oh my God, there is better engagement when people's values align, when they feel like they have a resource to go to, when we're not living up to who we say we are as an organization, when they see leadership behavior, whatever it may be, right? Or these stories get told, whatever the thing is. We haven't been good about connecting those things. I think in the last 10 years, maybe longer, it feels like 10 to 15 years to me, we've gotten a lot better about that, a lot better about connecting that stuff back. I think the other thing is we're also really bad in our space in figuring out what matters to organizations and connecting the work 100%. That we do back to that, what matters, right? And recognizing that what matters today, Nick, may not matter tomorrow, right? So we have this.
You can make any argument. I mean, to what we were talking about before. Like, I just feel like if ethics and if compliance, if this field actually has value, well, then I should always, if something's a beautiful picture, it should be a beautiful picture regardless of how I frame it. And I should always be able to like make an argument on how what I'm doing is connecting to this. And I should always 100%. Be able to frame it to the sales guy or to the ops guy or to the CFO and speak their language. I think that's kind of where the gears don't mesh or something.
So I agree. I think the other thing too is there need to be some unique things that we're drawing. I don't know what those are yet, but I'm going to talk about like in healthcare. So I'll give you the healthcare.
Okay.
So, everybody sells on these things about like patient experience or length of stay or, what we call hospital acquired infections. There's all these metrics, right? That the external government measures you on, and pay rates change, all that stuff. Okay. That's true in almost every industry. There are measurements you're getting externally and measurements you're making internally. The part of the challenge, Nick, is everybody is using those same things, right? So say you're going to a company, you're going to say,
like integrity.
Yeah. Like ethics is really good at returning engagement. And, you're going to say, oh, if you did this work, you're going to have, 1.5 times higher engaged employees. And the leader might be like, oh, that's really great. Because I heard a leader say this to me at an organization I was working with. They said, is that the same 1.5% engagement that the other service said they're going to get? Or is it the one down the road? They said they're the other company. You guys are all offering different things, but is it a cumulative? So now we're at 4.5% times engagement, or is it all the same? And so I think one of the challenges we have to do in the ethics space, ethics and compliance space, to be honest, is think about unique ways that we plug in that achieve the sort of goals and the strategy of the organization that can overlap, but maybe there are unique new ways of us thinking about this, right? So, I think market share is one, that we don't think about a lot. I know some papers have been coming out about this. I've seen some of them about, how can ethics help you get market share, right? Or how can ethics help with reputation? Tying things in that others may not have a direct corollary with that the ethics and compliance space does, and then leaning into that and selling it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's something in that. I look at it. So, we just did a session. I did like a 3-hour webinar on this ROI concept.
Yep.
And the way I kind of look at it is like, fine, we come up with something unique, but like to what end? It's not like there's never going to be a silver bullet, because the silver bullet that works today, it's not going to work later, later. So other people are gonna be like, oh, I'm going to grab onto that. And so I think what it really comes down to is, I mean, again, boil down what we're talking about to a discussion between a compliance person or an ethics and compliance person and like a CEO to get more resources. There's some argument that that person needs to make that is compelling and influential to make that person turn, the adversary, the CEO, turn from their current sort of view of the department or of like the resources that person is asking for to where they're thumbs down to thumbs up. And so I think it's kind of like, I mean, the thing that again, what do I know? But from my perspective, I feel like it's not a sniper shot. It's a scatter shot. It's like a shotgun. And
that changes.
Yes, that changes. And like my argument should probably change depending on who I'm talking to. And thus I should have a bunch of colors on my palette that I could paint with. Because if somebody's colorblind, well, then I'm just painting in reds and greens, okay? If somebody is, or maybe not, maybe browns and blacks or something.
No, I'm colorblind. It's not exactly like that, but I understand.
Okay. Yes, You know what I'm saying? Yes. But like, I need to your point, like I need to frame it in a way that's compelling. And I think many times we just try to hold our, hang our hat on just that single data point of employee engagement. I think that's part of it for sure. But a compelling argument to me is like, well, I influence this, I influence this, I influence this, I influence this, I influence this. And you can cut, and if you think I'm being too Pollyannish and you think I'm being too aggressive, cut each one of these things in half and it's still a compelling argument. That to me is more compelling. And like, in this whatever webinar that we did, I was kind of going back to, this thing comes out, the world's most ethical companies, and their stock price always outperforms like the rest of the market. Well, like that stock price differential is an enterprise value differential, and that enterprise differential is a composition of a bunch of things in the respective profit and loss statements. And each of those profit and loss statements are a bunch of accounts that are a bunch of like actions and activities. So to your point, like I can grab a little bit of this, I can grab a little bit of this, I can grab a little bit of a market share, and merely, from my perspective, in merely making that argument, you have the opportunity to like add some dimensionality to the position. Cause like, I know that I'm 3D, I probably look 2D to you on the screen, but if I can talk about some of this other dimensionality, then I think you start to increase the odds of that argument landing for somebody who might be myopically looking at the impact of this sort of cost center role.
Well, and I think this is just an and to your point, and it's the user you need to tailor to, right? So that's 100%. The other thing. You said it. I think I remember being in a session, this is 15, 20 years ago, I was talking with a leader about ethics, and I can't even remember the organization. I remember I was sort of trying to show the ROI based on 3 different metrics. And he came back at the end and he says to me, wait. And he looks at his phone, Nick, and he pulls up his calendar and he says, this is a talk about ethics. And I was like, yeah, it is. And he said, when are you going to get to the part where we're supposed to do it because it's the right thing? And I turned to him and I said, well, I definitely can say that if that will help you. I have no problem doing that. And I think this is the right thing to do. I don't disagree with that. I said, but would you be persuaded by that? And he turned around and he's like, continue on.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because
it's not actually mobilizing. That's not actually mobilizing. Right.
This is the other thing, like, and you've probably had this experience too, Nick. You go in, you're talking with the CEO and you're like, well, don't you want to do the right thing? Of course they want to do the right thing. I've never had a CEO and you tell me this, or a leader say to you, you know what, I think we should really work on doing the wrong thing here. Like, could you 100%. Tell us what the wrong thing is?
No one's going to say that.
Correct.
And because no one thinks that they are doing
100%.
On balance,
it's about balancing whatever priorities they have at their plate right then. And so your job as the seller, right, or the person who's trying to push an initiative is to connect back with what connects with them, right? So if it's engagement and that's what it is, then that's the double down. Yeah, you got all these other great things, but then that's where you need to go. Or to ask, I worked with an organization one time and I met with the executive leadership team and I was like, tell me the 5 things that keep you all up at night. And, they list them up. I was like, can't touch that, can't touch that, can't touch that. Those 3 things, 1,000%. Let me show you how. And then laid it out, right? And I think we just have to get smarter.
Now you have a map. Now you have a treasure map on what you can traverse toward and how you can sort of form your argument and frame it again. I mean, I love this space, dude. It's like, it's so interesting. There's so much opportunity in it. It's not like some of these more like mature departments in organizations. You know what I'm saying? Like, the sales department, the marketing department, I'm not saying they don't have their own challenges. I have those departments in my organization and I'm finally attuned to the challenges of those things. But like articulating the value is not as hard for those sort of, and maybe it's just a question of like the proximity on the P&L. The closer you are to the top, the easier it is to like make the case for your value. For something like ethics, which is amorphous, culture is this sort of thing that just sort of floats around. It's harder, to your point, to like tie it down and like maybe 100 years from now, the ethics department, everyone will be so bought into it that like they'll look back on conversations like this, like, oh my gosh, imagine they were freaking debating on like the value of this thing.
Yeah. What's this argument?
But like right now, it's not formed yet. Like right now, we're like Lewis and Clark. We're like traversing new territory. We're like exploring, and there's this like pivot happening, this shift happening. To your point, like that book, my grandfather would not have bought that book. Cool, good as the new cool. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
People today will buy it because they're thirsty for it, and we can talk about like why that is and all that kind of stuff. But it's such an interesting mix of all these things. Like, of course, you need to know the regulations, and you need to know, you need to put these sort of structures in place to manage the risk. But you also need to like influence people up and down the organization. You have to influence the stakeholders to like, hey, this is real, or this vision we have for the values of our company, they can be real, but it requires your participation. Managers, you have to like, model this stuff. Leaders, you have to like give me assets. You have to give me like resources to like make this thing, actually like animate it. We have to animate this thing in the organization. So it's just like an exciting, time, I think, in our space.
I think the other thing that's really exciting that's going on right now, and this is happening even more outside in healthcare, we have not a lot, but there are people like me in healthcare organizations across the country. I think we're starting to see, especially with AI, but I'd like to see it even broader, about organizations bringing on people who are dedicated to ethics, right? So like you see a lot of Salesforce, I think recently just hired a couple, ethicists for AI work. I think there's a number of organizations that are thinking about this. But there is some asset or value about thinking about ethics as distinct from, right? Not that they're from a lot of the work that compliance does, and that there's a specialized knowledge and a breadth and depth of things that go on in that space where there could be dedicated resources to doing that work that is separate and independent from compliance. 100%. The other thing I think that I would say about bringing an ethicist on board, and it's true in healthcare, but I still think it's true in other organizations across the board, is leaders need help. They need help. They encounter challenges in their daily work, and a lot of them they can address themselves, right? They can understand what the values are of themselves, of their organization, and they can make decisions. But we don't see outside of healthcare organizations hiring folks to help leaders navigate through the ethical challenges that they have. We basically say, you're a leader, tough it out, Nick. Good luck. And I think there is a space, hopefully in that 100 years looking down, so me forecasting 100 years from now, we will start to see more ethics people in organizations, because organizations will see the value of the work that ethics does, and they will recognize the impact that these ethical challenges have on organizations and the leaders and what it means long-term for them.
Yeah, I just hope that those roles don't turn into like high school guidance counselors or corporate chaplains. Yes.
I totally understand. Yes.
Yeah. Man, are we at time? My gosh.
We're at time. It's 11:03. Yeah.
My gosh. Well, thank you so much, man. I feel like this could have been a 3-hour session.
Yeah. No, it's great to chat with you. I appreciate it. Thanks for all the time. Thanks for your listeners. I have really enjoyed Nick, your podcast. I listen to it. It's on my drive home. That's
Oh,
when I
thank you.
get to catch up. So yeah, well, love to stay in touch. Definitely love to stay in touch.
Absolutely. Yeah. As we wrap up, if
Yep.
you have just one quick second, what's
Yeah.
one piece of advice you wish you had a lot earlier, or what's one piece of advice if you could just wave your magic wand and, every organization could hear your voice? What is the piece of advice that you wish could get out there, or
Could
back
I
to
give
your
an
young
different?
self?
Could
Yeah,
I give two
answer
different
both,
answers?
for
Okay,
sure.
so the first question is, what piece of advice was? I'm going to give the same piece of advice that someone gave me a long time ago. A professor of mine, Howard Brody. This is at Michigan State. He's recently passed away. He was an amazing doctor and human being and ethicist. And so I went to him and said, "I'm not the normal person. I don't have great grades. I'm not, And he said, "Do you know who Spud Webb is?" And I said, "Of course, this is a long time ago. You can clearly, tell how old I am." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you know what people told him when he said he wanted to play basketball?" And I said, "No, I have no clue." They said, "You couldn't do it. You're not going to be able to do it." He said, "You're Spud Webb." And I was like, "Oh, okay." He said, "But I'm gonna give you the same advice I would give Spud Webb. It just means you're gonna have challenges. But if you're really committed to the work and you really want to do it, rise up to the challenge and take it on and know that you're gonna have setbacks and you're gonna do all those kinds of things." So I would say to your listeners and folks, in the field, there are lots of challenges that are going to be, but man, be that Spud Webb. If you're really committed to doing something with meaning and purpose, rise up to that challenge and do it. It can pan out for you. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. Okay, so that's
Love
the
that.
first. That's the first thing. I think the second one, to broader, the thing I would give to the field. I know this sounds so cheesy, but I think it's real. I would double down on ethics every day.
Yeah.
I would double down on ethics every day. If we're going to focus on one thing, man, focus on values and how we make decisions in organizations and what values we do. So, if I had anything to share with the group, I would say, stay focused on that. I think in the end, it will pan out better for all of us if we do that, if we're thinking about how that work looks and reach out to people who have the expertise in this space and get help. It's, you got to ask. Someone once said something to me along the lines of, I can't get any feedback from anybody. And I was like, yeah, but have you asked for it? Right. So you gotta ask. So, and that ask can come down. I'm a leader. I'm struggling with challenges. Have I asked for the help that I need right around? I don't know how to navigate this ethical challenge. I don't know how to live up the values. There's competing values. What do I do? So ask for people who know who can help you navigate those kinds of things. And I think we'll all be better in the long run.
Whew. This is great, man. This is awesome. Thank you so much. This was a phenomenal episode. Appreciate
Great.
you a lot.
All right, thanks, Nick.
We'll stay in touch. All right. Talk to you
All right.
soon.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.